Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everyone's having a great time so far today. It's my pleasure to introduce our next session, a panel titled AI in Cybersecurity, Uses and Challenges. On this panel, we have Dan Wilkins, Chief Information Security Officer at the state of Arizona, Sachin, Sheth, Partner of Cloud Security at Wipro, and a Chief Information Security Officer of 2 subsidiaries, and finally, Jack Hamm, Head of Security Engineering, Architecture, and Delivery at Albertsons. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to all the attendees. We're very excited for a wonderful session. Hello to all our panelists here today. We're going to go ahead and kick it off with self-introductions. So, Jack, if you would be so kind to offer the attendees gathered here a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what your role is.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Jack Hamm, I'm the Head of Security, Architecture, Engineering, and Delivery, I believe is my official title at Albertsons Companies. The largest grocers in the United States and Canada. Prior to that, I was the CISO at Gigamon, and then I've had a whole series of tech jobs and been doing cyber for some time now. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Jack. Sachin, you want to kick us off with a self-intro?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. This is Sachin Sheth. I'm a partner for cloud security for North America with a large system integrator, Wipro. And I work across all aspects of cloud security across the 3 major cloud platforms, AWS, Azure, and Google, for all of our customers end-to-end, from strategy, planning to execution and implementation. And parallelly, I also run, I'm a CISO for 2 subsidiaries. One is in the financial services industry, another was in the healthcare industry. And I look after all the security operations for the 2 organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Dan Wilkins. I'm a CISO here in the state of Arizona, working in the 4th largest county in the United States. So we have quite a number of population here that we deal with and get benefits in the hand of citizens and a multitude of state services. But anyway, I've been doing IT security for about 27 years. And one nice thing about doing it for that long is after 25 years, you hit that mark and you don't have to track it anymore. You just say more than 25 years and you're good to go. So anyway, a pleasure to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. And Dan, with that tenure, I think we've just got to have you start off with the first question here. So the first question is, there has been a lot of talk about AI and cybersecurity lately, but in general, people remain skeptical about its true utility, at least from my perspective. And so what I want to ask each of you is just, what do you think about the utility of AI in cybersecurity, where we've been, where we're going, and anything else you care to mention? And Dan, again, if you'll be so kind as to just kick us off here.
Yeah, I will. Appreciate it. Well, this is an interesting topic because it's gained a lot of news space recently, and we've seen a lot of the Google assistants and things making hair reservation appointments and a number of different things out there that the technology is getting better and better. So we look at it from our side as, do we take advantage of this from a security perspective, or do we just kind of ride this wave out a little ways and see where it's at? Since there's so many uses for AI in our environment, and we know that the attackers are using it for a number of different reasons, and how they're trying to use it for leveraging exploits getting into our environments, we really need to take a look at, are we looking at this from the perspective of reducing that white noise and trying to get out in front of some of the bots and the automated activity that's happening against our environments today? Or are we trying to look at this from, I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses, I'm trying to keep up with what's going on, I'm trying to keep up with what my competitor's doing or something like that. So if we have our focus in the right area, if we're taking a look at this with the right lens of, am I truly trying to add a force multiplier in my environment? Or am I really looking at this to try to just stay up with the latest buzzwords and keep my 24-hour operations going and things like that? So using AI in an environment for triage, using it for recognizing attacks, all great things. I mean, these are ways that we can leverage it from a technology perspective and provide an actionable item to an engineer or analyst or something for them to be able to say, okay, instead of me sitting in there sifting through logs and going through all this information manually, I've got an AI bot that kind of does some of this heavy lifting for me up front. And then they hand it off to me, and now I can kind of get down to the more specifics where I might need a human interaction with discerning a file or file type or something along those lines. So that's my take. Hopefully that helps there.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Sachin or Jack, would either of you like to jump in here?
Oh boy, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think the first time they declared an AI winter was 1984 or something, when they first gave up on AI.
When they first gave up on it.
yeah. I remember. We probably did. We're all date ourselves here, all the 25-year of experience people. One of the problems I think that we run into a lot in cyber, and I think this is probably true across the board, but is what exactly we mean when we're talking about AI. And sort of prepping to come on, I was just Googling around to see what people were saying, and I saw these articles about how the attackers are now leveraging AI against us. And then if you can get by the sort of the smear of the media, you realize that, okay, so they're running automation and maybe they have some machine learning. I think the challenge is that there's obviously something there in the broad context that is scientifically rigorous and it's backed by research and we know it can do things. I think where we start to struggle is how do we actually turn that into something effective? And I'm reminded that there was a KPMG survey, I think last year or something, where some abysmally high number of executives were suspicious about anything that had AI in the name now. And so when I think of the utility of it, of course, I can think exactly to what Dan is saying, and I can think of lots of functional use cases where it'll be necessary to overcome the attacker-defender asymmetry. But I think where we have to be really careful is how we discuss that, because the jumping onto the, as Dan pointed out, is it the latest buzzword, and jumping onto the hype train about it isn't going to do us any good when it comes down to actually delivering against a reasonable set of expectations the business has. If we hype and we can't deliver, then that's on us. So.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Sachin, what are your thoughts?
So I agree with it. I concur with both of them, what they've commented. There are challenges with the system, and there are enormous opportunities with the AI potential that it provides for security. We all know we in security deal with humongous amounts of data. The speed and accuracy of processing that data is extremely critical, and AI provides a lot of potential to process that. But at the same time, jumping on the bandwagon and just trying to implement something can be detrimental, that can generate a lot more noise that we're already dealing with. And at the same time, I do see significant use cases of AI that are already being implemented. There are various tools and products that are coming out, that are already out in the industry, that leverage ML and AI effectively. So it is an evolving space, and the opportunities are plenty. And I think it can do a lot of good things for us security professionals, where we are constantly dealing with, like I said, huge amounts of data, too many things to do, too many things to process at a very fast pace with too few resources, and not quite often limited budget as well to be able to do things. So these are the areas where AI has good potential, I feel.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And also during the course of the panel, everyone should feel free to just jump in when you have a thought. One follow-up I wanted to ask, Jack, you mentioned, definitions being very important in addressing the ambiguity. And, I think typically we're talking about, narrow AI, meaning, a certain type of machine learning, which does something that helps the SOC, let's say, be automated to manage alerts. But is there anything more you would say about how to sort of address the ambiguity around definitions with AI, just since you kind of mentioned it earlier?
Yeah, I think when I think about, and I'm going through this right now with sort of my strategic roadmap, I think what's important to understand is not, and this has probably been true of all point solutions, by the way, over the years. Whenever we've had these buzz, be it SOAR or EDR, or now I guess we've replaced the E with an X, is what are we really trying to resolve from a business standpoint? So I have the fortunate role now where I can concentrate on the technology, which is what I've always liked to do. I tried the CISO, and then I said, okay, someone like Dan can be the CISO, or someone like Sachin can be the CISO. I want to concentrate on the tech. But when I look at it, I think that the thing that is important to understand is how does something, AI, whatever you want to call it, I've actually been using the terminology, cognitive technology, because if I think about what I'm trying to resolve, is what Sachin just said. We've got too much data. It's too voluminous. Like, we can't put people at the problem. So how do we then look at an augmentation? Can we enrich it with threat intelligence, for example? Can we automate away workflows using the other buzzy of SOAR? But the idea there, though, is that we don't start from the concept of the AI definition. Start from the concept of what the business problem is, and then figure out where that enrichment happens. And I certainly, I know I come in a little hard on AI, but it's as recently as the last month or so, I had it's called a potential vendor who looked me in the eye and said their AI could predict whether or not a specific asset would be breached. And so when you hear things like that, I forget apocryphally who said it, but extreme claims require extreme evidence. And I think that's the sorting part that we have to go through on it.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's jump into the next question. So, you're touching on exactly where I hope to go with this. So, Sachin, I was hoping you could address this one first because of kind of the really interesting different approaches you take to cybersecurity and AI as an integrator and then also as a CISO. So the question is, as a cybersecurity leader, what should the priority be when it comes to AI? What should your approach be? And I know Jack mentioned kind of being business use case oriented, but what would you say about this?
So my thoughts are, for effective use of AI, first of all, you have to have the right data. AI feeds on data, so right type of data, and they sanitize right type of data, eliminating junk, etc., is very critical. Then training that data models to your use cases. And that's where it gets into what the business use case is. What is it that you're trying to protect? What is it that you're trying to achieve with that? Training your AI models, that's the critical aspect of it. And then leveraging, testing that data models, the AI models to achieve the benefits, building the stability and the robustness, the usefulness out of it is the critical aspect. So it's a roadmap that has to be developed with specific use cases or targets in mind, and then going about starting with pieces of data, leveraging small pieces of data to build your models, and then test it against the unused pieces of data to see what makes sense out of it. Even comparing that with the human intelligence that we typically have been employing to mitigate, to identify risks, to do detection mechanisms, and to do mitigation mechanisms. So from AI perspective, what is it that you're going to use it for primarily? What business problems you're solving, and then using it for pattern analysis, for detection mechanisms, for even automated response, incident response areas, notifications and alerting areas. Those are some of the areas where you can pick and choose and start your journey with the right set of tools and collection of data. Again, data is with number of security tools that we have. There's data that is spread out in so many different areas and so many different formats per se. Collecting that and getting your AI engines to process and understand that is the critical aspect. And from there, you can start your journey.
Excellent.
Yep.
Dan or Jack, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll jump in. These are always the questions that we have as far as from a priority perspective. We say, okay, well, we want to do AI now. We want to jump down, this bandwagon trail here, or, kind of get in the cutting edge of the technology. So too many times we rush into something and not really know what we're trying to do here. So we need to really establish what the finish line looks like first. I mean, what does the goal look like? I use this analogy a lot. Can you imagine you're running a marathon and there's no indication of where the finish line is. You're just running, and you're like, am I getting there yet? I'm getting tired. What's going on? I mean, where am I at with this thing? And then you finally start, like, I'm really struggling here. This is really hard. What's going on? And then you ask the question, hey, how much farther are we going to go here? And the guy running with you is like, farther to what? What are you talking about? And they're like, we're running a marathon here. Where's the goal? And like, that was 75 miles ago. What are you talking about? I mean, we're at mile 100 now. I'm running like, this like, 250-mile race here. And they're like, oh boy, that wasn't what I signed up for. So we need to understand what we're trying to accomplish here. When we say AI, what are we implementing it for? Why are we using AI? Why are we bringing it into the environment? So getting back to what Sachin said, we need to establish the business requirements and figure out what problem we're trying to solve here. What is the actual reason why we're bringing AI in, and is this the right time to bring it in? Maybe we're not quite ready for it, but we're thinking about it, we're planning about it. We're trying to get down to that, putting on the roadmap where maybe next year, 18 months from now, we're going to bring it into the environment. And, instead of boiling the ocean and trying to like knock everything out in one shot, and these people like to get in this all-in strategy of, well, I'm going to bring in AI and my entire environment is going to be automated and I'm out the door and everything's handled and I don't have to touch a thing. Yeah, that's a lofty goal. That's really nice. I want to lose 75 pounds by July 4th too, but that ain't probably not going to happen. So, I mean, it's one of those things where, you really prioritize what you're trying to accomplish and look at this and say, can I break this up into small manageable pieces? Can I do this like a little bit at a time? Can I do a phased approach? Can I really have this idea of, what I'm getting at here? Because if you bring in something like AI, there is a massive amount of tuning involved here. I mean, this is not something you just plug into the environment. Oh, I put the fiber cable in the back. I'm good, right? AI is supposed to figure itself out. It's supposed to learn my environment. It's supposed to know what to do. And it's not quite that easy. You really need to spend some time with it. You need to have a dedicated, team of people, probably spoon feeding and validating and making sure the information is correct. So from the priority perspective, we need to understand what we're trying to solve and make sure that we're approaching this problem in the correct way.
Dan, that's actually, you hit on a point that I hadn't actually, we know this is something that I don't know that cybersecurity professionals have always had a strong track record with, but I think you hit on a really important one there of, do we need it at all? What is, and Sachin, you had a similar point about understanding the data and understanding, how are we going to ensure that we don't have model poisoning, that the model delivers against the outcomes we want. But one of the questions we don't ask is, what's that volume level at which we need it, and do we need it? I look from the retail industry I'm in now. So I've always been at my entire career prior to this has been at tech providers. So I've been on the sell side, and now I'm suddenly on the buy side. And one of my colleagues made this quip to me recently, and probably because I was trying to buy the latest and greatest thing, but his statement was, we're protecting the tomatoes, not the F-35s. And it's an interesting point that is worth looking at, and also sort of like, what is the promise of delivery against your specific sector? You're, Dan, being in government, you have probably something similar to us. You have systems all over the place, and age and legacy, and even the question of deploying it, where in that narrow design can you use it, as opposed to, Sachin's working very heavily in the cloud space, and maybe it can be used a lot more ways there. So I think that's a really important question of, not just how can we use it, but do we need it?
Is there some threshold where we all could confidently say, yes, we must have it? I mean, does such a thing exist? I'm curious. Anyone jump in?
Well, I'll simplify this for you. The reason why you adopt it is because you need to adopt it for that reason. I mean, as Jack was saying, you don't bring it into the environment just because it's out there. I mean, am I solving a business case with this? Am I solving something that I can't solve with my current technology or my employee stack or what I have in place today? And am I going to benefit from bringing this in? Am I going to say, oh, suddenly now I've streamlined, I've got rid of 2 FTEs, or I've reduced the amount of time it takes to solve an incident? Or, I mean, what problem are we trying to solve here? And if you can't define the problem that you're trying to solve here, I would say AI is not the right time for you.
Yeah, I sort of hate to give too cavalier of an answer here, but I'm an avid rock climber, outdoorsman, and there's always a joke. You'll know the day you needed the rope, because you'll be dangling off the bottom of it. So and in many ways, I think that's right. I think there's arguably it'll become apparent when you've hit those scale limitations. People see it all the time. Although I'd actually be curious, over Sachin, from you guys see all the integration work, so I'd be interested to know, is that how do people know when they need it, or is this so they have to be led that way?
So that's a great question. They think they need it, or they have a feel, mainly because they're hearing the industry buzzwords. But my observation is, and my firm belief nowadays in the last year or two, is leaning more towards that. Is I think most organizations need it. It's a given, and you have to lead the organizations in that direction, primarily because knowingly or unknowingly, almost every organization has undertaken digital transformation, whether it's a strategy and it's a path that they're following choosingly, or unknowingly that's happening where your data is all over the place. There are services that you're adopting from various vendors and cloud services as well. And with that, there is so much of information that's flowing. There's a proliferation of data all across. With that, there's security and tangible information that can be leveraged, pulled out from that. Patterns can be developed. All of that exists. And with that, the cybersecurity threat awareness has increased everywhere. The attack surfaces have increased tremendously with everybody working remotely, with the data being processed, using so many different tools. So there's data everywhere that needs to be fished out, and there's information patterns and security information needs to be fished out as well, compliance information as well. So in my opinion, it's a given where you need AI in your environment, and you need AI not only for your business purposes, for marketing and for your predictions and your financials, but for security as well. It's a given. And with that, there are a number of tools which are already providing fantastic information. You mentioned about EDR moving to XDR. There are a number of tools that heavily leverage ML and AI within that user behavior analysis. Even in your industry, we are helping some of the customers who are in a similar space and understanding what the use cases are and how they're being leveraged, and identifying and detecting abnormal use cases and matching that against patterns. It's not something that humans do very effectively within a timely fashion, and you don't want to find out 3 days later that that pattern was not right and somebody was coming in from Europe, and we don't have customers in Europe. So things like that, but it's very quick, and I think it's a required. So it's a given thing in most organizations across the industries. I hope that helps. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Jumping into the next topic. Oh, sorry. Was someone going to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I'll put you on mute.
Oh, okay. All right, great. So no worries. So the next topic, I think, that was a great lead into this new area. So I was hoping, Jack, you could kick us off here. The question is about a story about a use case for AI, and it can be successful or unsuccessful. But what I'd love for each of you to speak on, if possible, is, what was a time where there was an attempt at using AI for cybersecurity? What was the problem? What was the approach? And in the end, how did it go? Insofar as you can share, I know some things are confidential, some things are not, but I think it'd be very valuable for our attendees to approach this one. And Jack, if it's okay with you starting.
Yeah. So I've had my attempts myself. I've watched other people have their attempts. Tackling the question of success. I think the way I'll actually answer this is a little different. Is when I've seen, I've had the benefit of past jobs seeing a lot of customers go through their digital transformation journeys, and now I'm taking a lot of that to my new job here. When I've seen people be successful in their I'm going to sort of broadly call it AI strategies, I think one thing that was really critical to it was that they led off the problem statement and not off the technology statement. And so what I mean by that is that the people who succeeded let the goal of what they were doing choose the vendors and not let the vendors choose the goal. And I think there's a real finite nuance there, because think about, to Dan's point about the actual implementation of this, and you've now got potentially multiple vendors who are actually selling you what they, plug us into the Ethernet port and we're gonna tell you whether that bit was bad. And so the problem with that is that if you let the vendor discussion go first, I think that you are far more likely to have an unfavorable outcome, especially if you look at that strategy and then you start selecting more than one vendor who are offering similar outcomes, and you're suddenly running into collisions. So I participated in an implementation that went very well, where we understood that the goal was to specifically look at network traffic. We were very interested in the presence of certain executable behavior on IoT networks. Let's describe it that way. because we understood the problem, the right complement of vendors was selected such that in many cases, despite, and this is sort of the dichotomy of sales versus consumer in this space, like we selected some vendors and turned all their features off except one, which of course was very upsetting and alarming to them because they want to sell us a little of everything. But because the use case was well understood and the outcome was well understood, the question of selecting the vendors that fed the model right could be achieved. If we had let it go the other direction, and this is where I've seen it go badly, is, we go, oh, well, the world is easier if we just select one vendor. Like we would have never seen that kind of success. And I'm going through that now with my roadmap, starting, much earlier in the question just of what kind of data do we know we want today? What kind of data do we want to keep because we have some speculative ideas of what the future looks like, and we want the data now so we can train the models later, which is a big shift because most people start collecting data when they need it. And the question then is, well, now I've got 3, 6, I don't know, how many months of collection do I need to do before I can really test it? So the data preparation is I think also a critical phase on it.
Thank you. Dan, Sachin, you want to go ahead and give your story?
Story is probably an interesting choice of words here, but from a successful use case on AI, we haven't quite got to that point from the AI perspective itself. However, one of the things that I would like to make a point of, and Jack touched on this, was we have a lot of vendors that have some of this technology implemented on their stack, on their back end. And so indirectly, we kind of have some of this in place today. There's some things happening in the environment right now just because the vendors have brought it in and, as part of their native stack. And so when I look at this from, how do we solve the problem? Is it a successful use case or not? How are we moving forward with this? Where is the gap analysis? So I would perform a gap analysis and figure out, we have some AI indirectly through some of these partnerships that we have in place. Do we have some coverage in some areas that we were expecting to get with our own, artificial intelligence or our own, kind of machine learning or something like that in our environment? And if so, where are the gaps that we're trying to fill? So now we have a very target focused way to adopt this, technology, just bring it into our stack. And then how do we integrate this with our current, vendor platforms and make it in such a way that we're not completely dependent on that interaction? So if we have vendor X, and we have an integration with them, and then all of a sudden something happens and we, no longer have a relationship with vendor X and we go to vendor Y, do we have to start all over, or do we have a seamless transition? So what does that transition process look like? And how do we integrate with our, our upcoming, vendors that maybe don't exist today? Maybe it's a brand new vendor that starts up next year and they're like cutting edge and like, oh, we need to get this in the environment because this solves so many of our problems. This is amazing. So we have to look at this from a long-term perspective. And, too many people like they try to wrap their head around this. I'm going to do this short-term objective and short-term goal, and I'm going to get this put in and I'm going to get it tuned. And I didn't plan for a 3 to 5 year, roadmap. What does this look like? How do I maintain? How do I do our integrations moving forward? Going back to our previous statements, what problem are you trying to solve here? So if you charge in without a plan, if you don't really know what you're trying to accomplish, and you just basically I'm gonna end up in here, I'm good. You're running that marathon, not knowing where the finish line is. You're gonna get tired. You're not gonna know where you're going, and you're gonna go past where your native target would have been had you defined it, but it wasn't defined. So now you get into the situation of, how do we protect the environment? And I love an analogy. So I'll give you one more analogy here. You're a building owner. You have the responsibility to protect this building. Now it could be a data center, it could be an office complex, whatever it is. And you say, oh, I have a limited budget to protect my building. I can buy insurance, I can buy some different things. Well, now somebody says, all right, well, you're in the lightning area and lightning strikes your building and burns your building down. All right, well, I'll spend some money, I'll invest in lightning protection. Okay, well, now a car jumps the curb and crashes into the building, starts on fire and burns your building down. All right, well, I didn't plan for that. That's a whole different scenario. Okay, so you put up vehicle rams and you put up trenches and stuff, and you're like, all right, well, I've solved that problem now. Well, now some arsonists don't like your building and they burn your building down. I was like, I can't win here. The building's getting burned down. Well, we're getting back to the wrong problem here. What problem are we trying to solve here? I can protect against lightning protection. I can put fireproofing on the building. I can put vehicle, bollards up. I can do these activities, but the end of the day, now what happens if an earthquake, takes my building out, or an asteroid strike, or I still have the same problem. I haven't solved the problem yet. Now, if we solve the real problem of the building being out of service, now I don't care why it's out of service. Doesn't matter if a volcano or sinkhole or earthquake or flood, fire, it doesn't matter why. We've solved the problem. So that's what we have to focus on, solving the correct problem.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sachin, what are your thoughts?
Sure. We have few use cases where we have successfully leveraged AI, and there are other areas where we have dabbled with it and then we have left it aside because we didn't achieve it within the time frame that is required. But I'll give you one use case where it was extremely beneficial and it ended up being very good. Imagine large company, 200,000 plus people working across 7 continents, 70 plus different countries, different locations with different requirements. Many cases before pandemic, a lot of our people worked in different offices. Infrastructure is not necessarily great in other parts of the world. So there were requirements where people come into offices every day. Remote working was not very standard across, and people had desktops, and there were all kinds of security mechanisms in place in offices, whether it's NAC or other access controls, badge IDs and whatnot, and everybody working in different campuses, thousands of people. Come pandemic time, everything came to a standstill. Suddenly everybody's remote into different parts of the world, within different countries as well. And now suddenly everybody had to access everything remotely. As large as a corporation is, even the infrastructure is not built for that. So we had to overnight build things and open up a lot of the services that were strictly internal for access from various areas, whether it's Citrix or with VPNs or even external accesses. And that ended up changing a lot of dynamics internally. And of course, through the pandemic, we started hearing a lot more concerns and a lot more evidences of that the cybersecurity was becoming even more problematic, whether attacks were increasing, attack surfaces were higher. We were going through the transition as well. 6 months into pandemic, we realized that there are a lot more number of services that are opened up potentially, and there is no clarity and no understanding of what applications, what services, who's accessing from where, from what devices, because now everybody's using remotely. Some people had assigned devices, some were allowed to use personal devices, some were using something else, whatever they could scavenge and manage with till we provision everybody. And now it's a huge challenge where you have thousands and thousands of services running that are accessible over whatever mechanisms that were put in very quickly with no two-factor authentication, with generic passwords, shared passwords, whatnot. And we had to quickly mitigate that and take care of it. And it was a challenge where how do we even go about trying to find out, where you ask about applications and you don't even find who's the owner of this website, or who's the owner of this service. And something is a training website, something is a modeling website, some places we're actually hosting customer data, and that customer point contact is now not accessible, or there were various such challenges. So we went about going across our networks globally and collecting number of data metrics on the network side and the firewall side, as well as through our SIM systems, amalgamating and processing that data through various tools, which I wouldn't want to get into specifically, but there was a lot of work that was put in. And in a matter of less than a month, we identified 10,000 plus systems that could be accessed from various sources, from various devices, from outside the network, and we were able to pinpoint it to who are the people who should have access, who are regularly accessing it, who have over-provisioned accesses, areas where it was exposed potentially, where there was potential risks of the environments. And in the matter of about 90 days time, we were able to mitigate all such areas, take services down which were not required, put services behind Citrixes or other environments, VPNs, or in areas where we were able to control it and put it on cloud environment and put more stringent access control mechanisms, locking mechanisms, two-factor authentications. But basically take various steps to put in layers of controls across those services. And that was all possible because the areas where we could do the AI applications of it to figure out what is running, where, who's accessing it, who should be accessing it, and whether that's legit or not legit, to develop patterns of usage as well and access controls around that. And that I don't see that impossible. Even in 2 years time, it would have happened, even if you put in hundreds of people working on that, and the level of accuracy and the speed that was possible with it. So
Yep.
that was a great benefit, I would say.
You know what's interesting, Sachin? Like, it is that despite that being a very big use case, it is still like that. I think there is Dan was hitting on this. I think there was still strong definition in the outcome
Yes.
Even if the inputs were vague, and I think that's the place where this is potentially has a lot of use. I jokingly refer to what Dan's metaphor. The one I use is the beige house, where you decide you want to paint the house, and so you buy 50 gallons of beige paint and you paint all the surfaces the same color. But I think the interesting thing there is while the inputs were vague in what you're describing, like there was a strong output. And so working backwards, I think that potentially is one of the places where this is really a robust technology then to help.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And that's where the point is, where you start to solve a business problem. First, you identify what you're trying to get and then try to process that. That makes sense. And that's where you can apply the technology very well. If it was the other way around, to say, hey, we have all this data sitting on network flow logs and firewalls and load balancers, and we have everything in SIM and all the syslog environment, and let's process the data and let's figure out what can come out of it. It would have been a never-ending battle. You wouldn't be getting any concrete information out of it, or anything that you can take any actions on. But it was a challenge that we were looking at solving, and that's where this was extremely beneficial.
I'm actually curious. I now want to pick your brain to help my problem. The one I've had is backwards. Is if I can pick up, I've got a bunch of use cases potentially, but the one place that I feel like I've always struggled at least is the selection of the data that moves you towards the right kind of modeling. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, like we've got a lot of data choices.
Absolutely. So I mean, we can connect on LinkedIn and we can talk separately as well, because that's definitely an interesting problem. And even when we started with it, we had tons and tons of data, and that wasn't easy. And we, of course, threw a number of people at it. That's what the company does. Any problem, throw people at it, especially in parts of the world where resources are available at much cheaper cost. That's what typically the model seems to be, but that's not the solution in most cases, especially when you're processing data and trying to come up with some meaningful information, and you leave it to two people there, and they speak different mentality, different mindset, different languages. They both are going to come up with, this is risky, this is not risky, this is okay, this is not okay. That's never going to solve a problem. So you need consistency, and that's where ML, pattern matching, recognitions, detections was very, very critical. But yeah, I mean, we can connect separately and we can talk all day long for sure.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow. I mean, such great content. Thank you all for sharing. So it seems like kind of where we're heading is, work backwards, identify the business problem first. I would be curious, I mean, with what time we have left, which is just under 10 minutes, is there a greatest opportunity that any of you feel is an obvious place to start, or maybe if you can't identify it, the way to arrive at the place to start? I mean, I would be curious if all of you could weigh in on that question. Dan, what are your thoughts? I guess, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, great question. So I'm trying to encapsulate all the information that we've learned here today and kind of put my thoughts around this. But what I would say is we would like to take this and reduce the amount of time it takes a person to come up with this answer. And artificial intelligence, machine learning, they are fantastic at this kind of thing, because you plug away at this 24 hours a day till you give me the answer. I don't care how long it takes, just give me the information I'm looking for. And it can look at massive amounts of data. I mean, and it doesn't get tired. It can just work all day long, and it doesn't care, doesn't complain, doesn't do anything like that. You don't have sick time. So I think there's a really, really strong use case for using it for the way that it's intended to be used, meaning I want to leverage a lot of compute power, a lot of analytics side of things, because we could throw a team of analysts at something. I mean, I could hire 10 analysts and say, okay, you're going to go to work on this problem, and they could come up with the answer. But is that cost effective? And do I have to worry about, okay, well, 3 of you are going to work first shift, 3 are going to work second shift, 3 are going to work third shift, and then one's going to be a floater that's going to kind of fill in where needed. So am I solving the right problem here? We always come back to, are I solving the right problem? So an opportunity here is taking and reducing that amount of white noise, reducing the amount of time a person is going to have to interact and do something with that, and give them something actionable as an output. So if I'm trying to get this from a force multiplier perspective, which is really what we need to do, and we need to approach this in a way that we're leveraging it in our environment for a specific reason. If I approach it this way now, and I say, all right, team, this product is going to come in, we're going to tune it, we're going to get it in our environment, we're going to understand how our environment operates. And we don't know how these little things interact and how these little pieces come together. We don't know all the little things that are going to give us the information that we're looking for, but this solution here will give us those answers. We, instead of creating our own threat matrix and saying this tool covers these 5 things, and this one has these 4 log sources, and this one has this EDR solution or XDR or whatever. Machine learning and AI is awesome for this. I mean, it is designed for this type of analytics and data. And so using it in that way is really going to help us drive to get that answer that will help us further develop the product and further develop the solution.
Thank you. Sachin, Jack, either you want to jump in on most obvious, greatest problems, opportunities?
Yeah. So I want to rob a bank. And so I'm going to break the window down and the alarm's going to go off. And I've got 30 seconds to enter the code. And then if I don't, I've got 10 minutes until the police show up and the vault's on the other side. And I've got my best torch with me, but it takes 2 hours to cut through the vault. I can't rob the bank. And the issue that I think we've seen for a long time in the industry is treating this as a binary problem instead of a time dimension problem. Where I look at a use case, I want to find ways to accelerate not decision making, but prioritization. I'm now the 911 operator and I've got lots of alarms going off. Which one do I dispatch to? But the place where I don't want to use it is I don't want to take away the human decision making on the most critical points. So for me, the use cases are all about supporting operations and not replacing it right now. Because I've not seen any research that points to AI modeling being able to make human judgment calls right now. But from a speed point of view, as Sachin pointed out a minute ago, like I can't horizontally scale people forever to solve this problem. And so right now, if you look at this from a failure mode, go into any SOC and the entire board is lit up red. Everything is critical. And the problem that we need to solve, and where I think there's a real value here, is look, like we recognize there's lots of red problems, which one is the reddest? And like, that's going to be the gradation that we get out of this. And there's just a lot of opportunity to clean up, to present a package thing to then rely on human decision-making. And that's how I view this as its best opportunity moving forward.
So on my side, it's somewhat similar, where I'm looking to leverage the technologies to free up some of our security folks where they are, like I said earlier, they're inundated with data. There are too many things that are going on. And there are too many fires that they're fighting. And at times many of them turn out to be a know nothing, where it wasn't a big deal, but you have to go through investigations, you have to go through the triage and the incident response, you have to invoke processes around that. So in many cases, I'm looking to leverage various technologies. It's already in works where the workload is reduced, where there are not as many fires that they're fighting at a time. Primarily looking at elimination of false positives, where there are technologies with AI and ML that can be reduced, making them a lot more proactive with accurate presentation of data and cutting out all the noise, so giving them the concrete one. So then the analyst and the security engineers and investigators can then go in and dig into right areas versus looking at 10 sources of information to find the one key evidence that they're looking for to determine whether this is really an incident, this is an incident or an event, it's a false positive, it's a false negative, this is really something as critical, what's the severity of this, this is somebody needs to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, that kind of a thing. And there are areas where it's the contrary, where something looks trivial and something is not as critical. It's a SEV3 and is left for Monday morning when somebody returns. And by the time you come in Monday morning, the damage has already happened because, yes, there wasn't enough investigation done, but it spread out across the environment. It looked too trivial. And that's where information like this, where you're doing pattern matching, when you're collating that information with multiple sources of data, that's what I'm looking to fill in. Right now, SIMs are a lot more reactive, where you collect information, it processes that, spits out that information. By then, things have already happened. Matching that with threat intel that we subscribe to number of services from number of tools and technologies and outside field. We do our own threat hunting internally as well as user behavior analytics that happens with various tools and technologies. tying all that information in with the data that is generated using in various shapes and formats, using that to the benefit where you're, like I said, reducing workload as well as improving the speed and the accuracy of the incident response, or even detecting whether it's an incident or not. Those are the areas where I think it has tremendous potential, and it's already showing some benefits. And again, this is going constantly. It's an evolving field, but that's what I'm looking to leverage more and more. Where I don't think it's going to replace anybody's jobs per se, but it can facilitate tremendously in improving their jobs and improving their output, so to say. That's where I'm looking to leverage more and more of these tools.
Amazing. Well, we are almost out of time. Final thoughts from anyone about all we've talked about, and any takeaways from anybody?
You probably need another panel for this one, but the one that I think we didn't touch on is the defensive side, and something everyone should be thinking about. We're talking about how to operationalize this for the benefit of doing defense. But think about to a company who is leveraging AI for user modeling, how their users interact. What's the risk of attackers poisoning that model, going in and explicitly harming the data? We always talked in the past, we oftentimes have meant about integrity, about the interception and modification of sort of static file data, but what does integrity look like in a AI ML world, and how would we know?
Yeah, that's a great point, because we've talked a lot about correlating activity and making sure we understand what's going on and using that to make decisions off of, and sometimes that gets fed to an analyst team, and sometimes it's automated where it goes through a SOAR platform and some action is taken through an IDS or IPS or something like that. But the end game here is always comes back to what problem we're trying to solve here. And I know we've mentioned this a couple of times in our conversation here, but are we solving the right problem with adopting this technology? Now, I love it from a defense perspective, because security, I mean, we're on the defense all the time, and that's all we do is defend against attackers. And the attackers are leveraging technologies against us. So can we fight fire with fire? Can we come to the fight with the same tools and resources that they're bringing to the table, and use it to our advantage to basically knock down some of these automated attacks? So that'd be what I would say.
I agree. Also on the defensive side of things, we are already seeing some use cases where you can conduct automated penetration tests and proactive penetration tests based on evidences of some anomalous behavior to identify if the application is breached, or even there are any potential holes in the applications or environments present. And that's the area where there is, I think we didn't have as much conversations around that, but there are multiple areas, even detecting prevention mechanisms, I would say, in some cases, where identifying code, analyzing code to, again, compare with safe coding practices to make sure that you're not introducing vulnerabilities into the production environments at all. So when they're going in the lower stages itself, those are some of the areas where there is even greater potential. And that's something that we would like to leverage in the future as well.
Yep. Excellent. Well, we're going to turn it back over to Patrika. Thank you all so much for being here. I know this was a very stimulating conversation. We really appreciate your participation. We're so happy to have had you.
What a great session. That's it for the event's general session content. We hope you've enjoyed these sessions so far, and we'll see you at our track session beginning soon. Enjoy.